Of all the stories I've written and of all the books that I've created, very few ever get published. But this one was the one that even when I started writing it, I told myself I want to publish this book. And it is published, technically. You can purchase it for $1 on Amazon Kindle and get your own copy of Death's Diary. However, I will tell you the reason it is available on Amazon Kindle for $1 is because that is not the final version. After writing it, I really did like it, but I knew that I could do better. As I grew more competent and skilled as an author, I have returned to the story to give it the time, love, and care that I so greatly think it deserves. This is Death's Diary. This is probably the most important story I've ever written. And it's not even really a story, it's just a diary. But the author is Death himself. So what is the story? What is going on here? It all started a long time ago when I was just a little kid. When I was young, I was afraid of death. I lost my grandmommy and granddaddy, that's what we called them, very early on. I lost a good friend of mine at church. I was watching a lot of adults that I cared about pass away. Death was something that scared me. It was something that really, really scared me. And because of that, I always had this fear of dying. I was always afraid of putting myself in risk or in harm's way when I could potentially be hurt or killed. My parents told me not to look at death that way. Of course, as a young Christian, I was taught to look at death as a way to get to God. You know, death is just the bridge from the time of our mortality to immortality with God. You know, that's supposed to be the way we look at death. But that didn't change anything for me. It didn't change my fear. But then something did change. I was still young, I was still a child, but I remember hearing the story of the plague of the death of the firstborn. And if you don't know what I'm talking about, look in the book of Exodus, when Moses is saving his children, or the people of Israel, the Hebrews, from Egypt. The last plague that strikes is the death of the firstborn, where God warns Pharaoh, if you don't release my citizens, if you don't release my children, then I will bring death to all of your firstborn. And the Bible talks about how an angel of death came down upon Egypt. And I remember thinking to myself, is there an angel of death? Is there a legit angel whose primary purpose is to carry souls from this world to the next? Is there an angel with that job, or is it all metaphor? Was it really an angel? Is there an angel with that specific job, or could any angel do it? Did God do it himself? Like, we don't know. We don't know specifically. But I thought the idea was a fascinating one. And so I decided, what if this angel, if they are an angel of death and they have been around since the very beginning, and all they've done in the last several thousand years is just collect souls, how would he feel? How would he approach that? What would he have to say? What would be his thoughts? What would be his opinions on the world, on humanity? How does he feel about the way we've talked about death? Because every culture has their own way of looking at death, from Asian cultures like Japan and China and Korea to European cultures like Britain, France, Spain, Germany, African cultures, Australian culture, Native American culture, South American culture. We all have different ways of looking at and treating death. The ceremonies in which we do funerals, the way we fear or revere death, the way we kill and harm each other, the rituals we do for death or that we do with death. You know, there are so many things that we as humans have done through, with, and about death. What would the angel of death think about all that? And so I started writing a diary as if it was from the perspective of death. You know, so like it's not me, it's not just me writing, it is death writing it. You know, that was what I wanted to go for. And so each entry, because it is built like a diary, it's a series of entries. There's no date given to each of them. It could be at any point in time, but Death basically talks about what he does, what he experiences, what his feelings are, his opinions on certain things. Like, it's kind of funny. When I first started, I was very loose about what I wanted to do with it. And what I mean by that is Death could talk about anything. Current events, answering biblical questions, talking about different time periods in history. In fact, I opened the floor for a lot of my readers on DeviantArt to come and ask questions to Death, and Death would spend an entry answering those questions. It was neat, but I realized very quickly that wasn't good. You know, I thought, I don't like that Death is doing this sort of question and answer thing. That doesn't feel right. He doesn't feel like a character. He feels like a mouthpiece. Like when I created the name Raven Knight for myself on YouTube. I mean, don't get me wrong. I'm genuine on YouTube. I try to give you exactly who I am. But there are lots of people out there who create an identity for themselves or an avatar, like a VTuber or something. Somebody that's not them, but they can be their mouthpiece, you know? And that's what I thought Death was turning into. So I backtracked and I rethought it. I reapproached Death. And that's why I'm rewriting the story, because I want to reapproach who Death is. And as I've reapproached it, I have found myself, this is what scares me about writing the story. And I mean that in a good way. There are times that the things I write don't feel natural. Like I don't know where some of the ideas or concepts or words come from. And that is spooky to me. I've always said to people who want to get into writing characters, I say, make sure that you give the characters enough life that they aren't just you, you know? That they aren't just you speaking, it's someone else. And I feel like that's what's happened with Death Diary. It's not me writing it, it really is someone else. I don't know if there really is an angel of death, and I'm sure when I finally do die, I'll get to find out for sure. And I shudder to think what he would think if he read my diary. Like the one I wrote for him, he'd probably go, you know you got all that wrong, right? That'd be hilarious. But it does feel strange that there are times I'll write an entry and I won't know, like, where did this come from? How did I come up with this? Why did I use these words? Why did I use this phrasing? And so many different things. I've approached so many different things from Death's perspective. Like, he talks about suicide. He talks about Christmas. He talks about Easter. Because that was always a big one. What would Death think about Easter? He failed to take Jesus Christ's soul. What was that like? You know, and then of course there's, you know, the suicide question. How does Death feel about that? How does Death feel about murder? Death goes into a diary entry where he talks about his very first soul, you know, the Cain and Abel story, you know, talks about how Abel was his very first soul that he ever took and how he felt about that. Death talks about physical forms. He reveals that he can take whatever form he wants. He can be male, female, a child, old. He doesn't care. He can take any form he wants. Physical forms don't really matter to him. But he does point out, and he actually has a soft spot for children, because to him, children are innocent. They don't look at death the same way adults do. Children have a naive innocence towards death that he kind of appreciates, because they're not as, like, it's kind of funny. Think about it. Let's say that you're walking down the road and you see a dead cat or dead raccoon or something on the side of the road. An adult goes, ew, and tries to get away from it. A child may be tempted to go over and have a closer look, because, you know, there's kind of this naive innocence that comes with it. And Death kind of appreciates that. Death also talks about a lot of very controversial topics, which I've had to be very careful about how I talk about, such as the Holocaust and other such things. Writing these diary entries has been a way for me to explore avenues of history, society, and religion in ways that I never thought I could, and with a voice that I don't even recognize sometimes. That's why I'm slow about writing it, because unless I'm really feeling the urge or that voice, I don't want to write it, because I don't want it to be me writing it. I don't want to just walk over and go, oh, well, better write another diary entry, I better write this down. No, I want to make sure that I do it right. Actually, it's kind of funny. My friend Hannah, who is writing a book called Divine Warfare, wanted to use my idea for Death in her story, and I gave her permission to. She actually, funny enough, she had Death actually fall in love with one of the characters in the story, and that was very funny. I thought that was a very cute, romantic idea. Of course, if you were to ask me, do I think that's at all possible? No, of course not. But I thought it was a cute idea, and I let her play with the idea, and I supported it. It was fun. But more to the point, what are the goods and bads I can say about this story? Well, I've already laid out a lot of the goods. It allowed me to look at things from a very unique perspective, allowed me to play around with the concept of a new character and a new voice that I never had before, and it forced me to be introspective. But if I had to say any bad, I will say that the biggest mistake I made in the story was starting it off without the proper mentality. When you approach any kind of story, I feel like you need to have a tone or idea of what you're trying to create early on. You don't always have to know every single detail about what you want to happen. Sometimes it's nice to be a little surprised by your own ideas, but you should have a general idea of what you want to see in the character or in what they talk about. And I did not approach it that way right away. Another thing that some people have asked is, should Death's Diary be more of a narrative story, like have a plot where something happens and then it ends with something? I've considered that idea, like maybe death actually does have a story to tell across these diary entries, but I haven't decided on what it is yet, or if I'm going to do it at all, so it's something that I've had to really play around with. But I think the best way to say it is that Death's Diary is the story that I never expected to become what it was. I thought at first that it was just a fun little project for me to approach and look at death differently. I thought maybe it would be something new to kind of experiment with writing characters and voice. And yet it has turned into possibly the most important story I've ever written. Because not only did I publish it, it's the first story I ever truly published, but it's one that I came back to and said I could do it better, and I am so proud of it. It is very unique to me how much death has made an impact on me. And so, while I do think that I have written probably more engaging stories, and there are definitely stories out there that I think you guys would love to read more because they're more either lighthearted or more adventurous or more fun, Death's Diary is the story series that I think, if you were to ask me which one I look back on with the most pride, it would be this one. Because I put so much into each entry. It's actually one of those stories that my parents love reading. My parents share, each time I write a new entry, they share the new entry with their friends who ask for more. And I feel bad I haven't written a new one in a while, because unfortunately, while my parents love those series, most of my audience didn't love the series. So I stopped sharing my entries on YouTube. I just keep them in a private folder on my computer where I write them for fun in my spare time. I don't share them anymore on YouTube because so many people lacked interest, so no one really wanted to hear them, and which is the hardest thing about making writing on my YouTube channel. If people don't want to hear it, they're not going to take the time to listen. And that's not y'all's fault. I'm not blaming anyone. It's just the nature of it. So if people were saying, hey, why don't you upload more of those on YouTube? My response is very few people listen. And, with all the stuff going on in my life, I got to focus on where I need to, But regardless of that, back to the point. Death's Diary. Fantastic. It's one of the most special stories that I can think of. And I really wanted to gush on it here and on all that I have about it. Anyway, guys, thank you so much. And as always, I will see you in my next video. Take care.